Hello everyone, my name is Aizuki Yamamoto and today I am playing World of Warplanes. And today I would like to talk about a somewhat technical subject being the behavior and use of rockets. So first of all, as we can see, this aircraft has 6 rockets. This is the Yak-7 Tier 5 multi-role. These rockets are, as we can see over here, ground attack rockets. So they are meant to be used against ground targets. There's an effective range listed, not here actually, but you can test out the effective range. And when we shoot them at a ground target, they will deal damage against ground targets. Now, of course, we can also use these against aerial targets. And I myself find that in many cases it's way more fun to use them against aerial targets. And there are two main ways you can use rockets against aerial targets. The first is that, and this is actually the more complex one, is that a rocket, when you send it off, you will see that it explodes after a certain distance. And there's some variation in this distance, which makes it very hard to actually hit. And the second is actually the same as what you would normally do against a ground target, being that you would try to hit a rocket with direct impact. Now evidently, since I've already used my rockets here a bit, it will be a while before I can shoot them at an aerial target. But you can see here, one thing that you do need to watch out for is that you don't shoot your rockets from too far away, because otherwise they won't do any damage. Now, I'll just wait for my rockets to come back and then we'll see if we can actually shoot some rockets at an aerial target. Or maybe I'm just going to die instead, I don't know about that yet. And in the meantime I'll explain the main differences between air-to-air rockets and air-to-ground rockets. Air-to-ground rockets, so ground attack rockets, are commonly used to attack ground targets, and these are single-use rockets. When you fire them, you will be firing only one rocket, and these rockets generally hit pretty hard with a rather high explosion radius, so big explosion. Air-to-air rockets, on the other hand, also known as air attack rockets, fire a cluster of rockets, and this cluster of rockets will all explode when you hit even only one of them. Now the tricky part with this is, of course, you have to actually hit an aircraft in flight. And on some targets, such as this ground attack aircraft here, hitting a rocket can be fairly easy. But on more nimble targets it can be really quite difficult to hit rockets, since your enemy obviously will be trying to avoid getting hit. Nonetheless, if you do succeed, then you get the Rocketeer medal, which is always nice, and it can be a real sense of accomplishment, in my opinion. It's one of the more fun things to happen in a battle, at least I would say. So I've got my rockets ready, and I am now going to see if we can find a target to attack with these rockets. But bear in mind that we need to score a direct hit right now. And this is quite difficult, since if we're, for instance, looking at this aircraft over here, I already kind of struggle with hitting them with my guns. And if I use my rockets like this, You could clearly see that I gave it a good shot there, but it's quite difficult to actually hit him using rockets. These were my guns, not rockets, so not the easiest thing to hit aircraft like this. And we'll see a bit later that with air-to-air rockets, especially when you're confronting an enemy face to face, which is ideal for rocket use, air-to-air rockets are a lot more comfortable to engage enemies with. But there's also a specialized skill, namely Expert Rocketeer, which helps you score rocket hits on enemy aircraft. And this leads me to the one thing that I mean to be talking about, being what does this skill exactly do? So basically up until now we've been discussing how do you use rockets against aircraft, and if we then look at what the skill does to improve your combat capability against aircraft, is basically that it increases the virtual size of these rockets. So right now you can see it's quite difficult for me to hit, even though I did just get a hit there. I'm not quite sure if you could see that, but it was quite a big hit. But you need to be very stable in order to get an actual hit with a rocket. Now what the Expert Rocketeer skill does is actually increase the effective chance of hitting a rocket when it's quite close but not a direct hit on an aircraft. So if you take a look at my aircraft from behind, I would need to hit my wings, my tail, my cockpit in order to score a hit. But with the Expert Rocketeer skill, landing a hit real close would also count as a hit. And that's of course very interesting. Especially when we get to the air-to-air rockets, because in these ground rockets it is really difficult to hit rockets anyway, and unless you have a virtually perfect situation like the one I had just before, where you can take all the time in the world to align your rockets, then you're very unlikely to actually land your rockets. So let's see how that actually translates when we go to air rockets. So I'm currently flying the BVP 210, which has 3 sets of 8 anti-air rockets. And every time I fire a rocket, it will now instead fire a salvo of 8 rockets. Yeah, 8 rockets. And I will demonstrate this once. So if we look here, we can see this whole cluster goes away as one set. You can imagine that if you try to land these rockets, if you try to align this explosion in the distance with enemies way ahead, it's actually much easier than in the case of a single rocket. It is still a very hard tactic, but it is a lot easier. Now, when it comes to hitting rocket salvos themselves, it still requires a bit of getting used to, and it's not always that easy. One unexpected move by your opponent and you will probably miss. But of course, yeah, things like this, excellent kill there. Now this is actually without the Expert Rocketeer skill, and that suggests that we must have had a direct hit there. But what you may have noticed is that none of the rockets that I fired went through. All of them actually exploded in that big explosion there. And the reason for that is that air-to-air rockets generally explode as a group, rather than as the single rocket, because once a rocket explodes, the explosion of the first rocket will trigger the other rockets to also detonate. And this really causes a very big explosion which can deal massive damage. Now, the vital thing here is, of course, that you do need to hit at least one rocket in order to start dealing this damage. And the Expert Rocketeer skill definitely comes in handy in doing that. I hope to get the rocket kill there maybe, but no such luck. Since the Expert Rocketeer skill increases the radius of these rockets where you will actually get a hit, the first explosion will take place more easily. So this first trigger will actually occur more easily, and with that the chance of setting off this big explosion actually increases. And also you have less chance of one of the rockets actually going on and not taking part in the big explosion, but it's very rare for that to happen anyway. So in general it is very useful to have Expert Rocketeer on air-to-air rockets, because it triggers these very big explosions relatively easy. Now of course you can actually see that even without the Expert Rocketeer skill, these rockets are very useful indeed, but particularly against the smaller targets, fighters and multi-role fighters, the Expert Rocketeer skill can be of great value. I have to say, I really like this multi-role fighter for its rocket performance, but if you're making a video and you're up against a couple of good enemy fighter players, then it's not definitely the easiest time playing against them. Ideally with these rockets you would want to engage bombers, ground attack aircraft, and not so much fighters, of course, because these fighters they will of course outmaneuver me, and this might have been a very bad call here. No, he goes down. So yeah, we can take a look if we can actually pick up the enemy ground attack that's sitting right over there. Or maybe one of the other ground attack aircraft that's just inbound. Because if you can sit behind a ground attack aircraft with these rockets, that's where the real fun begins. And the most funny is actually that ground attack aircraft will sometimes happily have you sitting behind them, since they'll reason, oh but hey, I've got a big strong turret. And yeah, if you can then use your rockets, just a bit too short behind him there, you can of course deal massive damage on them. So pretty much, oh, I missed the entire salvo there, twice in a row, and then the third time did hit, but I didn't manage to kill the enemy ground attack. So rockets are an interesting weapon, but they are really tricky to use, and if you try to use them as forcibly as I'm currently trying, it doesn't always end that great. I can definitely recommend though that if you want to get into playing with rockets, that you spend some special attention to them. And you might have a couple of really bad battles, but eventually you'll learn to appreciate them, learn to understand when to use them and when to just completely ignore any opportunity that you might have, because generally it is not quite useful to try and play for rockets, so you should not do it as much as I'm showing here. But it is a lot of fun. I hope you learned something about Expert Rocketeer and why it might be useful, and let's see if we can make... shame there. Would have wanted to get the best type of rocket kill, which would actually be the range rocket kill, but that's really hard to master. And if any of you are really good at that, then I would love to see that. See you guys around.